So I come from Zambia originally. That's where I was born. I lived a life of a typical Zambian in those days after independence. Grew up in a village. I grew up in townships, Western Khayelitsha, for various variety of reasons and different circumstances. And then I had an opportunity after I finished my undergraduate at the University of Zambia. Went to the University of Cambridge, where I did my PhD, and then I embarked on two postdoctoral stints. The first at the University of Liverpool, not for the soccer, but for the science. And then I took a second postdoc at the Scripps Institute in La Jolla, in San Diego, California, and then joined UCT. This is actually my 19th year. So that's my brief journey in terms of where I come from and where I've been. Now, the first part of the question, second part of this first point is why is it important to have more representation of African academics? Now, to me, this is not a numbers game. This is not about numbers or faces. To me, it's about having a critical mass of quality African academics. Firstly, to ensure that we earn respect. Yeah, you cannot demand respect. Even disrespect, you cannot demand it. You earn it, okay, by your actions and by what you do. Anybody can talk. You can talk the talk, okay, but you have to walk the walk. The second reason why it's important to have a critical mass of quality African academics is that that is a very practical way of inspiring people, okay? Passionately, because you've got a talent. So it's not something you do without a talent, okay? So therefore, having a critical mass of quality academics will serve as an inspiration and encouragement. So it's possible to do things at that level, okay? Okay, that's very important. And I think that it's the third reason I think is really to do with what I was alluding to at the beginning. The perception, whether we can argue about it or not, it's real, and some of it is justified. It's because people make general statements about certain things. My responsibility, your responsibility, is to educate them. I don't want to say prove them wrong. That's not the way to do it. I don't live life trying to prove a point. It is simply an education exercise, if there is an opportunity to do so. Okay, and in the sense of having a formal mentoring structure or system. It never existed. In fact, it's never existed for me. Okay. However, with or without a mentoring system, I really strongly believe, and some of you will disagree with me, but I really strongly believe that the responsibility is on the individual, is on me, or the early career scientist, to take responsibility to get to a point when or where you know what you don't know, and then seek help. I think it's unfair to expect a system or somebody else who supposedly is mentoring you to figure out what you're struggling with. The problems we face in academia are not unique to South Africa or to Africa. They are universal, okay? We all face the same challenges, whether you're African or not, okay? So the first point is to recognize that when you have the opportunity, it's really important to make the most of the opportunity, to do what depends on you, to make that opportunity count, okay? Don't blame other people. Don't see yourself as a victim, okay? Life does not owe me, maybe it owes you something, it doesn't owe me anything, okay? So I'm not gonna blame anybody for it. But this is what is important, okay? Opportunity is very important. That you make use of the opportunity, because, for example, in academia, come on, who can stop me from thinking? Who can enter into my brain and lock my brain? Nobody can do that, yeah? So you have the absolute freedom to think, and the absolute freedom to think about an idea and write a research proposal. Nobody can stop you from writing a research proposal. Nobody can stop you from submitting a proposal to a funder. Nobody can stop you from getting a grant if the proposal is acceptable. Okay.
So I'm Heather Marco. I'm South African. I was born in Cape Town, and I have done all of my studies at this university, University of Cape Town, both at this medical faculty and at the science faculty where I'm currently based. So my experience comes from the South African context, meaning that when I was growing up and starting university, it was of course in the apartheid era. Okay, so all the problems and the negatives that are associated with that because of my population group came along as an obstacle in my journey. Yeah, so the state of emergency in the late 80s when I was at high school meant that I could not go to school. I could not sit for an exam, a matric exam, because it was considered to be an illegal gathering. It meant that I had to do an extra year of school and I had to teach myself, but I did it. Many of my schoolmates didn't manage that. Okay, their families also pulled them out of school to go and work, earn a living, support poor families, because that's what we were. I did get a place at university, at 2 universities in fact. Both of them were white universities, UCT and Stellenbosch. Science faculty and the medical faculty. And I chose to do science because this is really what I wanted to do. And it was tough. You know, being at university, being at UCT, the first year, the first semester, I finally realized what that word or words, gutter education, meant. The word that was flung around during our protests while at school. The gutter education meant what Kelly was alluding to when he went to Cambridge, that you were not fully prepared, you were not equipped. Even though you perhaps did have the best education for your population group, because you were a certain population group, you were actually at a few steps below the rest of the class. And the rest of the class meant over 90% of the other people that were there were not black. You have to realize what the problem is and then don't look to try and blame other people or become the victim. Take initiative and solve the problem by looking at yourself and inside yourself to get things going. Going to be very difficult for you, but as I said again, persist. Positive attitude, please. And don't blame the world outside. Yeah, it's easy to do that. But don't. It doesn't bring us anywhere, and don't blame the past, because we cannot undo that. We have to look to the future, to the present, look to yourself. What can I bring? How can I change it for the next generation? You have seen the mistakes that I have made, my generation, and the generation before me. Those mistakes maybe hurt you, yeah, or put you on a different trajectory, perhaps a negative one. You must learn from that and not do the same. Okay, so when you reach wherever it is that you want it to be, don't say, hey, I'm here, haha, nice, and that's it. Look to the ones that are still not there and help them. Okay, and this we have to do throughout the African continent, because if we look at our identity, we shouldn't say, I am South African, Cape Townian, as I started off. I was only placing a context. You should look and say, yes, I am on this continent, Africa. And I should not say, oh, because you are not from SADC or you are not from South Africa, I have nothing to say to you and I don't want to have anything to do with you. Okay, so academia is a very open, very global society, and we should communicate, we should collaborate, and we should network with each other. Please, 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 young ones, publish. Publish while you are busy with your MSc or shortly after. Publish while you are busy with your PhD. Don't wait for afterwards. Don't put stuff in a chapter and say, yeah, when I'm after graduation, I'm going to write these papers. No. If you want to get a really good postdoc and you want to get excellent funding, say from the Humboldt Foundation, they're going to look at your publications, your outputs. So don't be afraid. Why it is that we should expect to have greater representativity, or what was the question? Yeah, something like that. Why not? Huh? What's wrong with us? Nothing. So we should get there, and we must get there. But again, it's got to always come with responsibility. As the previous speaker said, you don't just walk into that position because you are black or because you are African. You must also deserve it, and you must prove that you are worthy to be a leader, and that is really what an academic is. Because we are dealing with young minds undergrads, young postgrads, young postdocs. Okay? So that is a responsible position that we take in. And also what we are then radiating to the rest of the world that are looking down at Africa and saying, continent, what are you doing? Especially doing to each other. Okay, and that's where I'm going to leave it.
I was born in a small village in Zimbabwe, where we did subsistence farming and all that, very happy, you know, in a family of boys and girls, equal numbers. And I went to a township school, and then also a township high school, and eventually to the only university in the country at that time, the University of Zimbabwe, just through hard work. My first time into a city like Cape Town was when I went to Harare to do my A-levels, what we call your high school. That was my first time to set foot in an urban area. So I'll just quickly go through. Once you've identified your project, you need to publish it, especially in good journals. I'll go on to the next step that you must anticipate. What you must look at when you're thinking of a research project is that you must anticipate what you are likely to get from your project. If the most interesting outcome is not very interesting, then there is not an area that is good that you must put any effort in. If you are not prepared also to follow your findings from the preliminary studies, then it's not actually worth beginning at all. If I can take you back to my honors here, I was fortunate to be given, to be allowed to do an honors in my final year of my first degree. And in 1994, then HIV was the hot area. People were dying left, right, and center. There was no treatment for the disease. So we thought, wow, why don't we look at trying to come up with a method to optimize ELISAs for detecting antigens for HIV. So the project, however, was high risk, however high interest, because everyone was looking for possible treatment. The recruitment was difficult. You go to the hospital, the following day, the patient where you took your sample had been taken away is dead. The project was unsuccessful. That was my first hit on research. I was very disappointed. Remember, I was doing it for honors. I needed results for my end of the year, but we had plan B. Plan B was that there were some farmers who were actually interested in finding out why their ostriches were dying. So we sat in our supervisor and said, why don't we just change this project and say we would now look at ELISAs for detecting poultry pathogens. We approached these farmers quickly, and the money was not available, and we kids. And the project was successful. So the take-home message on this one is that high-risk projects are very good. They can actually send you on a very good platform in the world, but if they fail, you must have a plan B. You must have something that you work as your plan B. And then this was a low-risk but low-interest project. It never got published. So look for an unoccupied niche that has potential. Especially if you are completing your postdoc, you need to think whether you want to continue on your basic line of research, or whether you want to go head with your mentor. Even in the base studied areas, I know some people are like, now if I win off from analysts, how am I going to establish myself? She's already a name in the field. However, if you carefully look in that area, there are always some aspects of that are not answered, or that they are not interested in. They think this is very small. You can establish yourself in there and become an expert in those particular areas. Go to talks and read papers outside your research area. Some of the best ideas actually come from talks that you listen that are not in your area. You find someone doing something that is amazing, that you then, oh, this can actually make a contribution in your area of research. So, however, once you decide in the area that you want, be conversant with the literature and attend to relevant conferences. This is the message to postdocs. Nowadays, the groups are joined are big groups. Some of the collaborating centers are in America. On the same project, there are 50 or more people working on it. You become irrelevant. Most of the time you do, if you are not leading in any aspect, you maybe you are author number 56 among 300 authors and all that. When you come back to recognition, you are not recognized. demand or negotiate that, of course, I can be in this big picture, but can I also have some aspect that I'm also doing and leading as a researcher? Take advantage of opportunities when they present themselves. You all know that opportunities are not always clear. Sometimes they present as crises. UCT at that time did not allow postdoc to go beyond 3 years. We had motivated, I was now in my 4th year. They are always, when a letter is coming from postgraduate office and say, yes, it's not our rule to keep you until. So what are your next moves? A lectureship position presented itself at WITS. I never lectured before, like my colleague was saying. And I did apply for it. From postdoc to lectureship is actually in terms of salary going down. I said, okay. I was married then, I've got a family. What do we do? I had to convince my wife, I said, this is good, but not now, but in the long term. You know, when you do such negotiations, after some talking, then we agreed that yes, maybe it could be good. And then I did go to VIS. I went to VIS. The first thing is the loads of teaching. Someone had just left, so I was thrown in the deep end. Because I taught the first 6 months and then I negotiated. So get into the system first. Don't be scared about what they say you will come to do. They told me in the interview, do 90% teaching, because that is what the person was doing. I said, yes, I will do that. I went into the first 6 months, I did yes the teaching. Then when I was comfortable in the system, I said, don't you think there is some space for me to maybe get 50% of this back and then I can do research? And that was agreed. So I grabbed the opportunity there. Be prepared to pursue projects to any depth. You have to work. Don't have that what we call the paralyzed academic investors disease syndrome, where that you hit a rock, you don't now your project was going on very well. Now you find, oh, but I can't clone. I don't know how to. You are looking at a physiological phenomenon. Now you need to see if you can take this gene and put it there. No, I can't. That is when you should find collaborators. If you think now that skill, you will need it again and again, then you have to acquire the skill. So there are two things. Collaborators, when it's a once-off, acquire the skill if you are going to need it frequently.
Yeah, so I agree with you that the onus should be on the PhDs and the postdocs to look for mentorship, but I think there's also a responsibility for those in PI positions to also give back and send the elevator down. And I'd speak of examples for young career people in the US and the UK. I mean, there's always an attachment to somebody who's helped them, who's mentored them. So I think I agree with your point, but I think there's also an onus, responsibility for PIs to also.
I think we're probably both saying the same thing. In fact, to qualify my point, I actually mentioned that I had people that I would go to talk to. Even now in my career, there are colleagues that start their careers and they come to me with specific problems, and I share my experience. But I also agree with you.
Okay, my question is to all the panelists. Would they briefly comment on how they made the transition from being a postdoc to having your own lab and having your own research question that you're focusing on and so on? That, because most people I know, after the postdoc, like you said, used to get letters from the postdoc funding office. Many people get stuck from there, and most either choose to go to industry or politics or something else. So many people fall out around that stage. So.
Yeah, I would like to ask a question to Colin and Kelly. I just want to know, what is your relationship with your previous institution, like the University of Zambia and the University of Zimbabwe?
Good afternoon. Okay, good evening to everyone. My name is John Wanyama. I'm an OT third year, so I'm undergraduate, and I would like to actually comment first to give the basis of my question. So I was thinking in terms of culture, and actually Thank you very much for the talk today. I was thinking in terms of culture and our African languages. So I just want to know, actually, that what is it that the professors or our black academics are doing in terms of like writing their publications in their home languages, so that for the young scholars or the, the students who are doing their masters and their PhDs, or even us as undergraduates, to be able to read it in our home languages or their home languages which they've written it in. My comment, actually, which I should have started with, is that I've actually been reading a lot about my blackness. I've been reading a lot about, things which have been written by Steve Biko, people like Frantz Fanon, and they've been comparing, these race things that, how white supremacy, is sustainable in itself. If we look at whiteness, we find out that people do not have to overcome these obstacles which we actually face as black people. So they have everything prepared for them in terms of resources, and their advantage in terms of the language which they actually read these articles which are produced, which is English, Afrikaans, and other languages. So I actually do agree with Professor when he said that we must earn respect as Africans, so there's no need to debate without implementing the plan of action, and that's what Frantz Fanon has spoken about. If it comes to decolonization and everything, these things will never happen with, medical practice. They have to take initiative as professors to write the articles in their home languages, and I would like to ask them, what are they doing in terms of that, to make it a point that what they've written so far is accessible in their home languages. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll address them one after the other. So in terms of transition to postdoc, from postdoc to academia, I guess it's a way that I believe in living life, and I always wish that I could just live life one day at a time, because then you discover, when you get this point, that there's something else, and there's something else, and something else. So when I went to do my PhD, I just was going to do my PhD and go back to Zambia. Then I realized that there was a whole world out there in terms of what I could do to improve myself. So when I did my PhD, then I realized that actually there's more that I can learn to really help me develop my own career. And when I did my first postdoc, so I did 2 postdocs, and I mean, there's just no shortcuts, because, your experience determines what you end up, because you're only, if you like, as good as what you've experienced. What you've experienced actually helps you, everything I do today is a result of my experience from my different postdocs. So every time I go to a point where I found out what I didn't know, then I wanted to get some exposure. Was, I think, something that was very critical in helping me transition to come into UCT with a very clear idea of what I wanted to do, because after my first postdoc, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I had an idea, and that experience in different environments really shaped my career and the way I look at things, because, when you're exposed to certain things, they help you transition. So in a nutshell, the more experience, the better, because then that really helps you settle down. Second question was about what am I doing with my home institution? Absolutely, and let me perhaps take this opportunity to say that capacity is best built around a project. One of the mistakes we try to make is to complain that, oh, I don't have this, so therefore I can't do this. It's really starting with projects. When you have an idea, that determines what you need to prosecute that idea. So to answer your question more directly, what I've been doing with my home institution, I have been, for a number of years, been providing scholarships and fellowships for staff members from the University of Zambia to come and do PhDs in my group, and also with colleagues in biology. And that has continued in terms of helping with the staff development, but also using my network to get some of those people to other labs. That's what I've been doing. And then the comment about publishing in one's language. That is very, very complex because, let me use the example of where I come from. There are 73 different languages. Now, which one? But also remember, science, I don't know about humanities, science, there's a common language. Chemistry, I don't know how else I can draw chemical structure in Zulu or Shona. A chemical structure is a chemical structure. And just to remind you, at one point, and this is actually a reality, that we've got to be humble enough to accept that there needs to be compromise because everyone has languages they want to speak. Everyone has languages they want to speak. In the past, German was a language of chemistry. Now it's English. So I think it's a matter of compromise and understanding that a language is just a medium of communication. And so I wouldn't necessarily myself personally make a big deal of the language because actually we are part of a global village. And the challenge is that, if we try to say something African, what is African? I don't know, maybe in humanities it's relevant. But to me, in science, it's not relevant because everything is global. And the moment we try to say African, we're going to cut ourselves off and be left behind. The final point you made about, you referred to white supremacy. This is a very sensitive topic, but let me just say this. What I've learned in life is that perceptions can be very dangerous and assumptions can be very wrong. And I know, for example, that when you actually get to know people on an individual level, okay, things that we do, and when I was talking about why we need high quality academics, is that there's a reality of a perception of how Africa is. When you think about Africa, in the US or Europe, it's disease, poverty, coups, corruption, you name it, the bad stuff. Okay, that's a reality. But how do we change that? Is not to argue, is to say, if I have an opportunity to change that perception, then I'll do it. So in my own experience of having friends from different racial backgrounds, white, colored, Indian, is that you'll be amazed that when you really find out about individual experiences, you'll be humbled to realize that actually it's not everyone you think is privileged is privileged. And so that's what I would say is that these are obviously general statements, and I think we must never use the past to poison the future. We're all human beings, that we need to look for coexistence because we were created to depend on each other because nobody's an accident at all. So that's the way I would respond to that, that it's actually, yes, whatever is wrong, that's in the past. We need to move forward. And I really urge you and urge everyone else, if you really, really, really find out about individual people, whether it's individual white people or individual black people, sometimes you find that your perception was wrong when you really find out.
All right, the language issue. Yeah, Kelly touched on a very good point. Which language do you choose? Your own language, then you're also excluding some others. Okay, in my case, yeah, English is my home language, but I have traveled to many other places in the world where I had to be in a foreign country, where I don't speak the language, French, for example, which is also spoken on the continent here, German, yeah, Hungarian, you name it, yeah? And it takes you to go outside of your comfort zone, so the language where you hear everything and where you understand everything, to go to another place where you don't understand anything. Some even have funny characters, so not our alphabet, and you can't even read what it says in Greece or in Israel. Yeah? So, and then you realize how important language is and how critical it is that we can communicate despite the language barrier, that there is a language that you can communicate with foreigners as well. And I think one of the reasons, if I may even be frank, to say why I turned down University of Stellenbosch was because of their language policy. When they offered me a job, they made it very clear that they wanted me to lecture in Afrikaans. I can do it. Probably not a very good job because I don't use Afrikaans every day. I did it at school because I had to, and then that was it. My science I know in English. When I open up a journal, it is in English. So my question to them was, why do you want to disadvantage your students? especially your postgrads. When they go out to conferences, international conferences, it's not going to be in Afrikaans or Zulu or Xhosa. So train them now that they can have a good understanding of a language, the language that most people are communicating in when it comes to scientific disciplines or academic disciplines. So it's not to say that we are dissing the local languages. We are simply saying, yes, there is a place for it, but when we want to be on the academic sphere and interacting with so many others from all over the world, then we have a common speak. When I meet with other colleagues on the African continent, when we get together for Agnes business, for example, we sometimes speak in German because the French speakers aren't comfortable speaking English. Yeah, but because we all know a common language, which is then German in that case, we all converse in German. So we shouldn't make a big issue about, really about a language, I would say. The other point about going from a postdoc to starting your own research group, yeah, that can be really tough because nobody tells you how to do it. You have to figure it out yourself. At least that was in my case. So you're thrown into the deep end with everything. But because you've been doing science as an honors student, as a master's student, as a PhD student, and you were in groups, you have certain ideas that have come from your supervisor or the other people that you have networked with so that you have a sort of a rough idea how to map out what you want to do when you're starting your own research group and the problems, the research problems that you want to tackle. The most difficult thing I found starting my own research group was how do I get students to come and work with me? You need funding for them, not just for the research, but also many of them would only come to you if you can provide a bursary package. If you can't give a bursary package, then, ooh, no, rather go to the dude that has a lot of money. Yeah? So this for me was quite a big stumbling block, but it's again something that one can surmount. It's not insurmountable. But so generally it is almost a logical transition. It's going to be difficult in the beginning because you don't have a template on how to work, but it is doable.
So as the speakers are responding, you can raise your hand and I'll just move you over.
Okay. I'll first respond on the issue of my contacts with my former institution. I currently advise the dean of the Faculty of Health Sciences. So I go home regularly to meet with the researchers in the faculty to identify the areas that they need support in, and then sort of link them with the relevant people that they do research with. And I also make available space for students from the institute to come into my research group and learn techniques, and possibly some register in the group and get their degrees. On the issue of transition from postdoc to academia, I think one of the critical things that you must do is, first, if you look at the area that you are working on, it must be a relevant area that you think can be, because most of the stable jobs that you get will be in long-established research groups or in academia. In academia, we're talking about teaching, so possibly your research should be one that gives you an advantage that you can actually also teach on what you are researching. And the other thing, as a postdoc, you must also be making yourself available to give that one or two odd lectures. Ask your PI to say, can I get this one in? Then I go and give it. I was fortunate, I was working with Professor Parker. He gave me one or two lectures to give for the time I was doing postdoc. And when I went to Wits for my first job, that was the age I had, that I had very good research and I had some experience in teaching, although it was not like my formal job to teach. And then during that time also, NRF was allowing postdocs to apply for NRF rating. I actually got rated before my PI. Just I was seeking. You must seek out and see what you can do. And then I had to help him to get also rated. So seek out there and try to see what you can do. So then I got funding early before I could. So when I came now as a senior lecturer here, I came with my own funding. That was very good. Because then when you come, you are not going to be told by anyone what to do. You then seek people who you think can add value to what you're doing. And I had lots of people who have gone to ask for advice. Professor Annalisa Williamson knows. If she has to discard anything in her lab, she has to ask me first whether I don't have any use of it. It's part of mentorship. So, I mean, there are people, so seek, I think, and also make yourself relevant. I think that's what I can say. I'm not going to comment on the language. It's very complicated.
James Mutuku, Computer Science. What I would like to use to share experiences in the issue of brain drain. These days, it's not from Africa to Asia or Europe, it's Africa to Africa. How do you reconcile your lives with the issue of brain drain, especially back to your home countries? The other question which I would like to maybe to pursue on the language issue, it's not going to go away, is like Professor Chibale said, it's not drawing a molecule in African language, but popularizing your research results into the native languages. For example, the first time I heard about Professor Chibale's work was like, this professor in Cape Town, his breakthrough in malaria drugs, and he's using copper. He's coming from the copper belt, yet he's doing this stuff in Cape Town. The people in copper belt don't know that their copper there is able to cure malaria all over the world. So we're talking about popularizing your results into native languages of where you are coming from, so that the local readers can know one of our sons somewhere has a breakthrough in one of these issues, not just journals translating them to popular languages. Thank you.
Appreciation to the panelists for the nice discussion. And my comment is tied to Mutuku's question or comment. And it also ties with the organization that we are talking about, ARSEN, and one of its objectives of encouraging African researchers to go back to their home countries, or the ones who are abroad, to come back and invest their expertise or knowledge in the continent. And it's a beauty that we have 3 panelists that come from 3 different countries. One was away in Europe and decided to come back home. 2 are in Africa, but not home countries. So I would like to hear from you, since it's a coffee table panel discussion, your thoughts on what can be done to encourage African researchers and scholars to stay in the continent and to also utilize the expertise back in their home countries. I know it might be a tall order, but I believe you might have some points to talk about and also empower the young of us who are here to go back home with our expertise.
Okay, I'm Tamge Usman. I'm a postdoc here in the Department of Immunology. I will have a comment on the language issue. You know, the first intervenant already spoke a little bit about it. So I spent my PhD in China, where I spent almost 5 years. And there, I just want to highlight that there are 55 languages, but yet they are using the Mandarin, that only language, to popularize, you know, everything. And it's the language that's also used in science. So they domesticated even the technology and everything, like you have software, everything written in Mandarin. So it just adds to the point of the former intervenant that, okay, maybe we should think of the language in a way of just popularizing our research results and even do further. So my question now is related to what Professor Chibale said. He says that there was a time where people were thinking that in Africa it's only good for clinical research. And I remember at the time I was doing my master's degree in those plant extract and those molecules, Professor Chibale might be familiar with that. We were having that phenomenon where as soon as compounds were extracted in our places, there were the PIs and the mentor were flying with the compound to Europe, and we hear nothing about it. And we are quite aware of, you know, that saying that African institutions and universities are sample providers, you know, for the research. So I just want to ask to the panelists, you know, what are you doing in your respective lab and the thing just to change that way of thinking, so as not to be only the sample providers for the world, to allow real research to be carried here. Thank you.
My question is to Professor Kelly. So, while explaining why we need African researchers, why it is important that we have African researchers, you mentioned Afro-pessimism. And you went on to explain that this perception shifts on an individual level. My question then to you is, how do we tackle systemic Afro-pessimism?
Thank you very much. So I think the question on the brain drain is very similar to how to tackle it together with your question on what we need to do that. For me, it's a very simple solution. And it's first of all to understand in the first place why somebody decides to leave their home country, because that's not easy. It's purely, as far as I'm concerned, and this is actually the reason for a lot of these problems that we have, where we keep lagging behind. And that is actually creating an appropriate infrastructure and a supportive environment. I can tell you, not just me, because I haven't gone back, my friends who have gone back to Zambia, or those who went back to Nairobi that I have, were destroyed, okay? When I say destroyed, there is just no infrastructure. So when you talk about brain drain, why should anybody go back to something where there's nothing? Because you're going to lose them. We're going to lose the talent even now. I'm always actually insisting when we have discussions on capacity building. Yes, Africa has been sending people to go and train in Germany and the US for a long time. Countries have been independent for a very long time. Why don't we see significant change? Is that actually when they come back, there is no comparable infrastructure that allows people to actually implement whatever ideas that they have, and a supportive environment. And I'm sorry to say this as well, full of PhDs in these countries. Pull him or her down. You want to be the only one who's done this and things like that. So we actually are our own worst enemies. I'm sorry, that's just my experience. So I think that, the way we're going to address this problem, let's build the infrastructure. Because to me, if you ask me what is patriotism, if I'm South African or Zambian, it's not necessarily being in Zambia. It's that I must never forget that that's where I come from. I must still maintain my links and help where I can. It's the same thing as thinking about, if you want to help anybody else, unless you have the means to do so. So for me, it's what I was saying when I was giving advice is it's about opportunity. For me, it doesn't matter where you find an opportunity, whether it's on Jupiter or Mars or whatever, is that you don't forget about your continent or your country. You do what you can to help. That's how I would deal with that. So I think those are two questions. The question of popularizing science, I completely agree. But I actually believe that the best way to do that, apart from the fact that universities like UCT have outreach programs that they go to schools and so on and so forth, actually, the very example you used, to me, is the most effective way where we actually use science, for example, for societal development. Use science for development, where you create something that makes an impact. I always argue when we complain about not having money, money is difficult wherever you go. It's difficult in the US, it's difficult in Europe. It's not just that it's difficult here. But the problem is that why should the government, for example, in this country, give me money to do blue sky research when there's Kailicha and houses to be built there? So my challenge, and the challenge of every scientist, is to convince our leaders and the powers that be that research is not a luxury, that we can actually, it's not about, we can't solve all the problems, we can minimize them. And I think that is a challenge. So it's really doing things that have an impact. There's innovation and translation that makes our leaders actually see the value of research, because we like to complain and complain and say, well, we can't do this because we don't have this, we don't have this. And we don't understand that these leaders and politicians have their own mandate. And maybe, just maybe, that we need to look at the other side of the coin, that maybe we should be doing something that convinces them, that actually they can get more votes, make their life easy, make their job easier by actually delivering. I think that was the last question, yeah?
Okay, to the brain drain thing, and the question linked to both brain drain outside of Africa and brain drain within Africa from one African country to another. The Alexander von Humboldt Foundation that I'm so closely linked with, they have a beautiful postdoc system. They pay you to go to Germany, do your postdoc there, you get really excellent training, get full coverage, and they pay you to come back to your home country. And they pay you while you are here looking for a next position, etc. And I like this principle because it says to you, this is where you should be. Take your training back home and spread it further. Okay? So if you want to speak to me afterwards about the Humboldt and opportunities, please, you are welcome to do that. Movement between African countries, I don't really look at that as a complete brain drain. Of course, somebody is being lost to that original country. Kelly is sitting here and not back home, or similarly with my neighbor on the other side. But they still have links to their old institutes. They have links to those countries, and we are still training people, and that should be our brief. As I said, in the academic sphere is really quite global. You can't say, oh, I don't like the politics of that country, so I'm not going to send students to train there, for example. Yeah? If there's a good opportunity and it could help your students, then that is where you will go. So the other organization where I'm involved in with Agnes, we in fact have mobility grants to allow people, and I want to gear this especially for the young postgrads who don't have such a lot of money, to move around within Africa. So if somebody, for example, sitting in Tanzania wants to do something and there's a good research infrastructure, let's say Kelly's lab for argument's sake, yeah, and has all the instruments that would help that student to get ahead with his or her PhD or with project, then we can provide funding for that student to come for a short period, do the work, also see what it's like here, and go back. So I think we shouldn't get panicky when everybody hogs just to one country and leave the rest of the African continent. I don't think it's going to happen in a hurry. My colleagues in Ethiopia are complaining about the opposite problem, that they have so many young people and all are ready and wanting to come to university. There are just not enough space and not enough universities to accommodate all of that. So if we can help each other out, and of course always the individual should know when is the right time to go back and to go back, because opportunities are arising. Africa is a very young population when we look at age, so in the demography. Many youngsters, and we're going to need more and more academic places because we have to open up more universities to cater for people wanting to come. And so there would be a position for people to go back to their home countries and take up a space there. The whole thing about providing samples to the rest of the world and not processing it right here, yes, that's a problem. But it's not just in academia that it's a problem. Huh? Also in industry with gold and so on. But those things are changing. So what I do personally as a researcher and academic, I try to bring that perspective to my students and any other student that I'm associated with. And so, for example, 3 years ago, I started a program, and I will run it to its completion this year. And it started because I thought exactly what you saw. I'm in the biological sciences, and the newest order of insects was discovered on our doorstep, our neighbor, Namibia, the Mantophasmatodia, little insect, the gladiator or the heel walker it's called. And who was it discovered by? Big science paper. Not by an African, by a German. Yeah? So we need to keep our eyes and our minds open. I say it again. Yeah? We have to be observant. We look at things and we don't see it anymore because it's always there. So we miss these opportunities and rather send the sample somewhere else to be done. If we keep our eyes open, we can see what is unique, and there are so many unique things on our continent, in our countries, that we should really be taking advantage of it. So what I've done, as I said, for the past 3 years now, was to actually go to places like University of Namibia and also to Germany and so on, to say what we have and to say to people to keep it, let's work with it. And if it means collaborating with the others, then so be it. I mean, why not? As I said, collaboration is good. But we should also get the recognition, and we should be doing things for ourselves.
Thank you. I'll start with the issue about the diaspora. I think one thing that people miss is that South Africa, in terms of black academics or achieving black academics, there is a lack of role model where students at various levels see black people who have achieved, which actually is a very important component in their training, which makes them actually know that actually they can also achieve to that level. I think I heard someone was talking about Frantz Fanon and about Steve Biko and all that. It is actually about the mindset, to say actually, because the dogma has always been, if you look at the black consciousness, that there is an inferiority in terms of thinking, that I don't think I can do this as a black person. So bringing in black people who actually can show that they can do it, actually role models a lot. I get a bit uncomfortable with this topic only in that it appears that in the set of South Africa, the diaspora are black Africans. And I've not come across where the question is asked about, we've got foreign nationals who are white. They never asked when they will go back, who are foreign nationals. But when it comes to black foreign nationals, it's a very topical thing to say, when are you going back? So I don't know where it comes from. But also, remember also that people coming to these, I'll add on to what Professor Jibale said, opportunities that are there to train everybody from across the continent. So I think I would take this as an embracing thing, as something that actually helps us to really confront all the challenges, because all the challenges that we face, especially health, they are interconnected. If South Africa succeeds, let's say, in whatever research and the rest of the Africa does not, they've not done anything, because we meet, we travel and all that. Let's say infectious diseases, they will spread. It is in the interest of all the countries in Africa actually to be possibly the same level of research or understanding for us to combat whatever we can combat using research. If you look at the issue of Sambo helicopter research, as he puts it, it's been problematic. We have to acknowledge that. We published a paper that we're talking about the H3 Africa ecosystem and the science ecosystem. The issue is we have to acknowledge that we don't have some of the technologies that we want to unlock, all these secrets of life in terms of our research. But how do we benefit from these technologies that are, let's say, in Western countries? We don't completely ban the send of samples, but what about if we say we will send the samples together with our students for training, and also possibly ask our governments to buy the necessary technologies for us so that we can do the same work here. So I would say, yes, it is a necessary evil if we can really ride on it and we can benefit from it. On popularizing science, yes, I think I will now comment on the languages. I think when the discoveries have been made and they are, let's say, pivotal and very helpful, I think governments can popularize those findings. Because as you see, it's very difficult in different settings where you've got over 200 languages in a country to choose one. It's a way of discriminating the other, but possibly popularizing those findings that have reached, let's say, the market, like the drug you're talking about. Once it becomes, let's say, usable and all that, then we can try to translate it now into all the languages, but not at baseline, because we try a whole lot of things, some that don't see the light of day. So we can't write that up for all the languages, maybe only for the successful stories. Thank you.
So I just sorry, I forgot to answer a question. Yeah. So the question was on Afro-pessimism and how we deal with it. Yeah. Afro-pessimism, yeah. So, in fact, just to clarify, so Afro-pessimism, in my definition, it's not just people outside the continent, let's say in North America or Europe, not expecting, let's say, innovation. And the things that are associated with the continent is the bad stuff that I mentioned earlier. Okay, and that's probably true to a large extent. You know, there are exceptions. But Afro-pessimism is also on the part of Africans themselves, that they actually cannot believe that you can do this. So when we talk about innovation, you know, what is innovation? So when we talk about African medicine, and this is what I really struggle with, and this is links to the point about people stealing samples, or we always you know, I wouldn't say bad mouthing, but we start saying, oh, these people come and steal our wealth, they take our minerals, whatever. But hang on a second, wait. Who stops you from exploiting those resources? And the reason is exactly what Colin was saying. We just don't have the technologies at this point in time. So therefore, to be humble is to say, okay, we will share in what we can share until such time as we create the infrastructure and the technologies. But to really deal with Afro-pessimism is exactly that. Going back to my point earlier, if we have Africans who are demonstrating the success, so when you do it, yeah, if you don't believe that people who look like me cannot jump, what's the point of arguing with you? I just ask you to give me a chance to jump. And when I jump, you will shut up. So for me, the best way to deal with Afro-pessimism is to realize that we have a responsibility to make sure that we make use of the opportunities to do something that will change the perception. So each one of us, so it's not about me, it's about a critical mass of people succeeding in different things in a positive way so that we can remove this negativity that surrounds our continent with all the bad stuff that goes on here. And I think that's how we're going to address Afro-pessimism, is to do it. And when you do it, there's a chance to do it. Of course, people will take notice. And for me, I said earlier, it's not about trying to prove a point. I don't live life trying to prove a point. It's simply education. Because prejudice sometimes actually is based on ignorance. And perhaps that ignorance is well-founded. But until you educate somebody else about doing it, not talking about it, then we won't confront Afro-pessimism.
I'll try and make this short, actually, because I'm not well qualified to speak at this forum on the grounds of either nationality or colour. But I've enjoyed what the speakers have said. I found all of them actually very eloquent, pragmatic, and quite inspiring, and I would repeat this exercise, actually. It's an area that I've been interested in for a while, and it's broadly referred to as capacity building, and we've worked on the human side of capacity building. And we've tried experiments, but one or two of the issues that have come up are recurrent, and I think there are solutions or pragmatic ways of approaching it. So the thing about samples is that we have a rule that the student goes with the sample. We don't have all the equipment in Africa or even at UCT to do all the analyses that we will wish to do if we want to be cutting edge. But the student goes with the sample. That's a general rule, okay? So that that person is at least trained in the analytic techniques in the event that we can bring back that equipment to do the same kind of work here. African languages. I mean, yes, whether it's Mandarin or English, you have a lingua franca, or French, that's a lingua franca, or German of science. But where there is a huge role on this continent is for greater public engagement in science, and I will very strongly support initiatives to bring science to the greater population and not have it the preserve of the elite. I'm going to ask a question actually about this mobility and there and back fellowships and Humboldt, things like that, because we kind of reinvented them in an application that we're waiting for the outcome of. I know that there's a lot of non-South African Africans in this room. In fact, UCT's been much better at developing non-South African Africans than South African Africans. How many non-South African Africans would be interested in coming to UCT for 2 years and having 2 years to go back to their own country, notwithstanding that I'm going to come on to your point as well. But just a straw poll. Who from outside South Africa, if given the chance, would want a grant that brought them to South Africa and then gave an equal amount of time and resource to work in another African country? Wow. Good. So let's hope we get the grant. But Colette's raised an important point. I mean, science is intrinsically mobile, and you won't change that international imperative. The opportunities for mobility within Africa are quite limited due to limited critical masses. The other thing that you cannot do is infringe a person's human right to betterment, okay? So if someone says, I want to go to America because the top lab doing the top work in the world in my area of interest, and I might go there and stay there, you can't infringe that human right, okay? You cannot infringe that human right. You can only incentivize it to try to make it different. But you can't infringe the human right. And I do take the point about, you know, when's he going to go back to London? Well, lots of people keep asking me that as well, not least of all my family. But I'm going to stick it out a bit longer. And then there's another dynamic that I've encountered at interview recently, which I find distressing, and is counter to the currency of science, which is a mixture of collaboration and competitiveness. But you might as well all be aware, South Africa is overcapacitated, it has too much money, and it's not really part of Africa. Now that's a very, very difficult dynamic that people who are trying to raise money for African scholarship, and in particular scholarship at this university, are having to deal with at the moment. And I don't know to what extent that sentiment is widespread. I doubt it's widespread in this room, but you should be aware it's out there. And I think it needs fighting against, because that's like saying, we're not going to fund Oxford, Cambridge, University College, Harvard, and Caltech because they've got too much money. And on that rather sinister point, I'll end my comments. But I would repeat again, I've really enjoyed and listened very carefully to the testimonies of the three speakers and enjoyed the comments as well.
So I have Adana as the last speaker, but I'll take one last call of comments and questions before we get to the concluding remarks from the panel. So this is your last chance if you want to make a comment. Adana, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to touch on capacity, critical mass building from the ground up. So I did a BSc in biochemistry because I didn't get a position to do medicine. And I think a lot of people in the audience can relate that our parents' dreams are usually to become doctors, lawyers, or business people. Can you comment on what needs to happen to better sell science on the African continent to high school students and undergrad students?
That's a very important question. Well, very close to my heart. Oh.
Oh, hi. Evening. A couple of months, I've attended a South African PhD project, and from there, it was said that one of South African goals was to graduate about 6,000 PhDs per annum. Currently, at the moment, I think we are graduating about close to 2,000. My question is, do we have, like as the nation, do we have the capacity to absorb those 6,000 PhD students with the industries and the institutions that we have, because it seems like I have so many friends that are unable to be absorbed at the moment, as we are having the 2,000 per annum, but the 2,000 are unable to be absorbed by the government. And just a quick statement, or probably another question. I've always sensed that probably we are a nation of quantity or not a nation of quality in some way. Thank you.
Okay, I would like to add to Agano's question, and also related to the answers I got from the panelists, to explain why we need to send our samples abroad. That, okay, obviously we don't have the infrastructure here for those things. And if I'm not wrong, it's like, okay, we have to tango with the government so that they can sponsor the funding for such equipment. So my point is, don't we think that we are failing, I mean the science is failing to tango with the government? How good is the relationship between the scientific community and the government? Because I think there should be a kind of talk or chat between the two entities. Thank you.
So the comments were about selling science to Africans on the continent, absorbing graduate students and wanting to over quality, and failing to lobby the government and probably a lot of comments that I think were heard. So maybe the panelists can respond.
Actually, amazingly, to me, all three questions are one. I would deal with just one answer to deal with those questions. And this is something that really struck me, especially when I went to California to do my second postdoc, is just how much I realized, including my own boss, my own advisor, and all the big professors, including Nobel Prize winners, how much they are so entrepreneurial in what they do. Spinning companies out, they are millionaires, but also very famous scientists. And it's not just that they're making money. Some of them Nobel Prize winners and colleagues that spun out companies, and they're very happy in universities. That is a fundamental problem that we have, because when you are choosing to do medicine, okay, it could be status, or sometimes it's just perception that if you, and why not? Why would I want to go into a discipline where I know I'm not going to get a job? Why? Because at some point, becoming an academic is not something you're born with. When people say, oh, no, I always wanted to be an academic, I don't think that's true, because you find out along the way that the world opens up for you. But what attracts you to a discipline is a perception that you're going to get a good job, and so on and so forth. So the problem with science, training 6,000 PhDs, I don't agree, actually, because where are they going to go? Okay, who is going to employ them? Who is going to absorb them? Now, it's not just a problem of the government or politicians. I think it's a mistake to keep blaming politicians and the government. What can we do as scientists to do, in a small way, make a contribution to creating jobs? The example I gave you is exactly what has really, really shaped my mind and my thinking. We set up a center right in here, which has a lab here, as a lab at the hospital, and a lab at chemistry. And we're employing, now we have 40 people. In 2009, there were just 4 people. In fact, 4 postdocs. Now we have 40 staff members employed, including, this is a very important point, including 6 very experienced pharmaceutical industry people with 25, 30 years experience from Boston, from Merck, to come here. Why? Because we've been able to address the question of infrastructure, okay? And they come for interviews and they see, oh my goodness me, they can really work here. And that is what's going to fuel economic growth and development. And that is what's going to make the government to listen and support us, because they can see that we are making a difference. We're creating jobs, we're providing opportunities, we're providing hope, we're building infrastructure that helps to attract people back to environment. And I can, in a very small way, speaking with humility, it really is very important. The government, politicians will actually listen. But we like to criticize and blame, actually not actually saying, this is what we've been able to do with the little that we have. So if you give us more, we could do more.
Yeah, I agree with Kelly there. Rather, instead of the push, the pull always works better. So he's correct. Of course, practically setting that up takes some doing. And again, will be perseverance involved there to start making something out of almost nothing. Yeah? And then the other point to your question comes also with intellectual property, that universities should employ and people, researchers should be aware of that. So even if I go to Namibia and I want to collect animals, not large gemsbok, antelope or stuff, but little insects, okay? You have to really jump through the hoops there before you get permission to collect animals. They want to know exactly what are you going to do with this? Where are you going to send it? What do you, even with the genes. So looking at the molecular biology of that, there are clear-cut rules on what to do and what you cannot do. And I mean, this is the thing that we should also implement, that other products, plant products or so, cannot be exploited just willy-nilly without giving back to certain communities or countries.
I think commenting on the issue about PhDs, I think first, I did speak about role modeling. When I was growing up, the only people I admired in my environment were teachers. I wanted to be a teacher. When I moved from a rural area into Harare, then I said, wow, it's not only teachers. Then I started to admire other people. So this idea about medicine being is just the exposure that we get. And coming into the 6,000 PhDs, I think it's a question of trying to find, are we training the relevant people, people in the relevant techniques? We can train the 6,000, but there must be people who are also able to create jobs, like you were saying, Kelly. That if we, let's say, train them in biotechnology, in the relevant areas, that will help stimulate the industry. But if we train them in areas where they have to wait for someone to create a job, then that's a problem. I think that's my idea. I think I just want to thank the organizers of this event for this opportunity. I just want to add on that, despite all the difficulties that you might think you are facing, you must be prepared also to give back to society. I want to applaud one organization of students here who are going back to Khayelitsha, to the high schools where they are actually career guiding the students, which have become also associated with in some way. To me, that is the only way we can start actually improving the lives of the people in the community. And to you postdocs and PhD students, look at your research topic, if it's not too late, and see whether it's relevant, and try to project where that will land you if you are going to stay in research. Thank you.
Yes, thank you to the organizers also for inviting me to come here with and you guys for listening to us. So I just want to urge again, you must realize where your problem area is, okay? Or what problems or obstacles you are facing. And then you must sit, please, and think, how can you overcome that obstacle? Maybe talk to some other people, look around. One of the obstacles that I faced when I was doing my PhD was that not all the expertise was here in South Africa to help me. So what could I do? Either I change my research topic or I take forever in getting my PhD done. Yeah? So, network. And networking nowadays is relatively easy because of technology. So what I did was when I go to conferences or I meet people or I read papers and there's a contact, an email or something, you can write to that person, introduce yourself very briefly and say, hey, I'd like to learn this technique, or I would like to start something like this. How can it be possible? Can I come to your laboratory, maybe just for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, wherever the person is in the world? Okay, so you have to get a visa and you've got to get money for flights and accommodation. But you can do that. There are people that are willing, and companies that are willing to sponsor such short visits. Okay, so my last point to you is don't get frustrated with the problems that you are facing. There is a solution somehow, somewhere, and you should look and identify that and then act on it.
Thank you very much. Just two things. The first one actually is related to what my colleague has just mentioned. It's really that the challenge or the obstacle is in fact the opportunity. We can never grow without challenges, and it's challenges that make us grow. And one of the most difficult things in life, particularly in academic life, is how do you stay motivated? So whatever issue you're dealing with, whatever circumstance, whatever prejudice, whatever it is that you're dealing with, my hope is that you will use that as a source of motivation. You know, when we are told to love our enemies, to pray for our enemies, and so on. I don't know whether you understand that, but for me, it could be for a variety of reasons, including the fact that when I know somebody is my enemy, I don't like to make enemies, but sometimes enemies create themselves. Is when I'm watching my back, when I know somebody is really, you know, then I'm really going to, you know, be on my toes. So sometimes we need to be grateful for people that, you know, are chasing us behind because they keep us really focused and determined. And the final point I would like to say is that just do not underestimate what is possible. It's very easy to look at somebody who's successful at this point in time, but you don't know what they've gone through. It only takes a few committed people to change history. As they say, in life, there are three types of people. Yeah? There's 3% that make things happen. 5% watch them as they happen. And the rest wonder what happened.